right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ITS seminar for this week. I'm very pleased to introduce our first external guest speaker of the quarter. We have Marcel Moran, who's an assistant professor in the School of Planning, Policy, and Environmental Studies at San Jose State University. He studies urban transportation, including in-person field collection, use of satellite imagery, and analysis of large open data sets. He's got a really cool paper on traffic cameras and violations in New York City. His published research has led to policy changes in San Francisco and New York City and has appeared in Forbes, City Lab, NPR, and the San Francisco Chronicle. He earned his PhD in City and Regional Planning from UC Berkeley, his master's degree from the University of Chicago, and the bachelor's from Harvard University. And I'm excited to see what he has in store for us on comparing the United States and France. So without further ado, Marcel.
Thanks, Jesus. Well, thanks for having me. I want to thank Professor Barajas for the invitation. I'm a huge fan of UC Davis ITS. Doing my PhD in the UC program, it just kind of stands out as a real center for excellence, tons of research. And so it's a thrill. It's my first time on the Davis campus, so it's great to share this space with all of you. How's the volume in the back? You guys hear me? Okay, great. I'm gonna project. So today I want to kind of talk about two different ends of the transportation spectrum in terms of how we design for cars versus design for pedestrians. And I want to give a kind of French case that I worked on this summer, and then talk about an American case that I'm working on right now with a graduate student, and we're hoping to submit this spring. So you're seeing a project that is finished, and then a project where is still in the oven. So it'll be really fun to get ideas from all of you on where these projects can go from here. Feel free to interrupt me with questions, and I think I'll definitely also leave time at the end for questions. You can just raise your hand, and I'll try to get to those. And I suppose for those on Zoom as well, happy to field questions remotely. So I should turn this on. So I want to talk about a school street pedestrianization project in Paris. I want to start there, and then I want to close talking about drive-throughs, this kind of very American kind of land use, and thinking about these kind of two ends of how we use our space. But let's start in Paris, in this kind of example. I've been really lucky starting during the PhD and during my postdoc, and now I have a long-term kind of research program on French cities. This has been funded by the French Embassy in the United States and their affiliated organization, Albertine Foundation. So very, very grateful for their support. I encourage you, for people with interest in France and French research, I encourage you to just follow these pages on LinkedIn, because they have lots of scholarships. They launched a new program for master's students to do work in France. So just really great partners in terms of American-French collaboration. Okay, so the first project I did in Paris, just to give you context for the kind of work I've done there, was in the immediate kind of aftermath of COVID. They expanded their bike lane network to a really dramatic extent. This is under the leadership of Mayor Anne Hidalgo, who is now finishing up her second term. There'll be new mayoral elections in a few months. And what I was looking at was how the bike lane network had expanded in these kind of chunks, 2005 to 2009, 2010 to 2014, 2015 to 2019, and then this expansion that happened in just a few months in 2020. And how COVID kind of supercharged and created this policy window for really ambitious active transportation planning. The second project I did was looking at pedestrian crossing distance using satellite imagery and data extracted from OpenStreetMap, which I'll talk more about in terms of the drive-through project. Along with my collaborator, Deborah Layford at NYU, we mapped the pedestrian crossing distance of every crossing citywide. It's a city of about 2.2 million people. And from there, you can notice all kinds of spatial patterns and clusters. We overlaid crashes on top of that and saw an association between crossing distance and crash probability. So these are the kinds of projects I'm thinking about in terms of streets and how we allocate the public right of way. An important kind of piece of all this, right, is the pandemic. And about this kind of school street project, France, among other European cities, had a really severe kind of lockdown program. You had to interact with police to go to the supermarket. It was very different than the American context. And what came out of that was a number of initiatives to kind of rethink about the use of public space in this very crowded city that has fairly low car ownership. Less than half of all Parisian households have a car. And so one of the projects that came out of this with a lot of energy was called Rues Écoles, just school streets. In French, this is announcing there's more than 200 throughout Paris. And I want to talk to you about this pedestrianization program. So the basic idea is that if you have this kind of school on the right and a street that is otherwise fairly unremarkable, right? We have some bollards here and these kind of metal grates. You have a bike lane, but this is, cars could drive on this, cars could park on some of these, and they would replace that wholesale with this type of pedestrianization. They're changing the materiality. They're using this kind of heat reflecting pavement, expansive landscaping, trees, and closing off car traffic automatically. So this really kind of visually stunning kind of project. There's been a lot of international media about this. It has garnered a lot of positive attention and people saying, well, why can't we do this, right? And a lot of the American kind of urban media like Streets Blog and these types of things look to Paris. I've been a part of that kind of like fanboy campaign, right? Like I was in one of these YouTube videos talking about how great it is. But one of the things I wanted to do was to actually spend more time and document the context of this project in a lot more detail. And I wanted to, if I could, in doing this, contrast it to other types of street pedestrianization programs. This is a school street program in New York City that we're hoping is going to be expanded under Mayor Mamdani. So great to say that, Mayor Mamdani. This is a low traffic neighborhood in London. And of course, some other types of famous programs like Superblocks. So I really wanted to contextualize the school streets program in Paris to these kind of other international examples. So I had 3 research questions. How do school streets differ in terms of design, layout, and features or amenities present just within the city of Paris? Right? There's pushing 300 of these now. And what I saw happening in the public conversation was that they were treated homogeneously. We would see the kind of flashy version full of trees and children playing. And spending a lot of time in the city, I knew that wasn't the case across the board. I wanted to track, using different data sets, how school streets have proceeded spatially and longitudinally. I'm really interested in the longitudinal nature of street change. And so I wanted to see if I could use historical street imagery to track this across time. And then to what extent are school streets lower in surface temperature relative to control streets? So I had one kind of specific question on this kind of environmental effect of these kind of streets. So the first piece was kind of just capturing the spatial extent of these and their size with high resolution satellite imagery, right? You can clearly resolve where these streets basically begin. With that different type of pavement, you can compute the area and the length. It added something like 40 acres of space and 8 miles of pedestrianized streets. So that was very straightforward, right? Just relying on the kind of satellite imagery piece. The more interesting piece for me was documenting the amenities across all these. At the time I was doing it, which was this past summer, June and July, there were 272 active sites. And so I spent 6 weeks going to all of them. I just wanted to really comprehensively kind of build this spatial database of what these streets look like. It's a ton of fun, and I really recommend this type of field work for graduate students because it's so nice at the end of the day to have a data set that no one else has, right? You don't feel like you're going to be scooped as you're writing this up for a journal. And it's always interesting to me to build data sets about city programs that the cities don't themselves have, right? Because I always think to myself, could I have just asked City Hall for this information? Probably not, right? They probably didn't have it at this kind of granular. I mean, they certainly know where these locations are, but I'll kind of show you what I was trying to gather. So at all 272, I was looking for the presence or absence of these amenities, landscaping and trees, seating. I don't have a photo in this deck, but they also created child-sized benches. So not just benches for adults, but like benches that were this tall. They're really adorable. This kind of child-centric, or these kind of hopscotch stencils, water fountains, bicycle parking. They're actually installing these type of bike maintenance kind of little stands. You can stand your bike, and there's attached hex wrenches and those sorts of things. And so one of the things I was able to do is track these across the board. You can kind of see that the swinging gate, which is the key to pedestrianizing the street, this gate that will close but can open if firefighters need to get in, that was present at about 70% of all the streets. Trees very present, bike parking, level grading, landscaping, and then a pretty big drop off to those other amenities. So just this data, just this chart cuts against something of the narrative of Paris's School Streets program, where they're all incredible and amazing and full of amenities, right? It was noticeable to me actually just at how many of them were building this space. We want children to play and parents to linger and all these types of things, and there's nowhere to sit, actually. So it actually just becomes this corridor to walk through. It's still lovely, but it changes the transportation behavior and this kind of social fabric that these streets can engender. And a much smaller number had cooling pavement and water fountains. I think throughout all this, what I'm describing is a snapshot in a moment in time of summer 2025. I'll be back this summer doing related work, and I imagine this will have changed quite a bit. So this is just capturing it in one moment in time. It should not reflect this program in perpetuity. A big piece of what I was trying to do, I've gotten to know Paris City Hall well enough in their data sets that they often do a type of accounting that comes with a wink. And so one of the things I realized is that a number of the 272 streets in their School Streets program have been there for over a decade and have nothing to do with this mayor, but they're counted as part of this new program. So I called those pre-2008, and I used 2008 because that is the earliest street view we have in Paris. And so I was able to detect with street view, it's like, oh, these have been pedestrianized long before the program we're currently talking about, but they're included in the total. And you can kind of see like the materiality is really different. It doesn't have the cooling pavement, very little landscaping. They're pedestrianized, they're lovely, great places to stroll. But it's interesting that they're in that count, right? Because that's not reflected in the kind of media fanfare about this. There's another percentage, and I'll show the percentages. There's another category that I called open to cars. So you have these kind of planters here that create something of a chicane where you are calming traffic and you're reducing parking spaces. There's no gate, actually. So to even call these a pedestrianized school street is in some ways disingenuous. And so a large percentage were open to cars. I was able to kind of show where that's happening spatially. Now we get to really what the School Streets program is starting to be known for, which I called phase one. So phase one is a street that is otherwise left unchanged, but it has the kind of movable gate installed. And they put some signage here, right? Access only for firefighters, and no driving, no motorcycles. And they changed the kind of the crosswalk stenciling. These streets are, I would say, pedestrianized, but they don't have the kind of inviting amenities, right? That the program is starting to be kind of advertised as such. And then we get to phase two. These are glorious. I really feel that way. I think that they're fantastic, but I think it's really important to put the phase two in the context of the entire program. And when Paris says, well, there's more than 300 of these, you have to remember that it's all 4 of these put together. And I had just never seen that calculated or spatialized or cataloged. So you can see the kind of breakdown. Pre-2008 is almost a full quarter of the program. Open to cars, 17%. Phase one, it's a little hard to see, this is 27%. And then phase two, 32%. My guess is that over time, you're going to increasingly see the phase 1 and 2 take up more and more of that percentage. But if we want other cities to emulate this and to pursue this, we should tell them this kind of really clear story of what's happening. For those people interested in like the money of this, the financials, Paris City Hall estimates that this costs about $10,000, phase 1, and that phase 2 costs about $400,000. So if you map this spatially and you think about where they're actually fairly evenly distributed across the city, the numbers come out to about $32 million thus far have been spent on this program. I would say that's a conservative estimate for how much Paris has spent on these. There's a pretty large gap here. Maybe some people are seeing, it's hard to see the underlying base map. That's where the Eiffel Tower is, Champ de Mars, Arc de Triomphe. There's a lot of like heavy kind of cultural touristy institutions here. There's not as many schools actually in that part of Paris. And so fewer chances for school streets. Yeah.
The phases look like at least one of the examples you showed us was a pedestrian city versus the others that were like car cities that was repurposed to be a pedestrian. You have it kind of like instead of these phases by like categories of, it's kind of looked like phase 1 was a pedestrian city to start with.
How do you mean?
If you go to the picture you showed us,
sure.
It was like the one that was very narrow and it's only cobblestone. This one, yeah.
Just historically.
It's historically, yes, was a pedestrian city.
It's a great point, like a pre-automobile street.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say some of the pre-2008 were like this. You're in a very old part of Paris, and you get the sense that this is just pre-car anyway. Some of the pre-2008 were actually in newer areas of Paris, areas of Paris, and such that they were, you could tell they were designed to have a pedestrian flow, but have been lumped into this program's accounting. It's a great question. Yeah, Raphael, right?
Yes. So the follow-up question for the historical, like pedestrian-friendly streets. So, for example, La Défense was created during like the car boom era. So
Sure.
It is car-centric. So, is there any projects going on also like La Défense with like?
So it's really interesting. He's mentioning this kind of district of Paris that has like corporate office towers and actually looks very un-Parisian, right, to an American tourist. I would say there's a number of, these are happening kind of across the historical architecture and city planning of Paris in interesting ways. And some of the more interesting school streets are happening like right around here actually, where you have other modern office buildings. And it's interesting because I think there's something about the old streets that lend themselves most to the pedestrianization because the underlying geometry, really, there's a lot to unpack here. One of the tools I use, and I recommend this also to students to think about how we can use Street View for these kind of historical projects, is I tried to use Street View for the longitudinal question. And so you can very clearly, kind of across the board, as you can see the evolution of this, where you have a very car-centric street, the phase 1 very clearly, where you have the gates, the stencil, the signage, not much else, and then phase 2. So to think about the parents whose children go to this school across 3 grades, right? Your kid is going to a dramatically different school in terms of the external kind of atmosphere. Imagine how much your journey to school might change, right? Across just 3 years. You're a teacher in this kind of school. And so what I wanted to do was to take advantage of this imagery to track this across time. I found that there was about an average of 2 years in between a street. Go for it.
I was just wondering, so in the original picture, one of the big things that you're losing here is a lot of street parking.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the US that's always a humongous issue with people. And so I'm curious kind of about what the Parisian response to that was, if it was.
It's a great question. How do Parisians feel about losing their parking? So unsurprisingly, it's mixed. I went to one of the things City Hall does in between Car-Centric and phase 1 is they have a open house basically. And they do another open house between phase 1 and phase 2. So I went to one of these and you had merchants complaining and you had parents championing it and you have this kind of balance. I think this part of the context really is that Parisians have very low car ownership relative to an American city. And another piece is American school travel patterns are very complex because of school choice and these different types of programs. At least in Paris, most students, certainly younger students, are going to the school closest to them.
Okay.
So there really is this sense of like, this is part of my walk.
Yeah.
There's contention only in about 300 school streets now, only twice did Paris start going to phase one and then pull back based on community opposition. Just twice. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just more context on how the Paris children go to school? Do they typically walk? Do they bus? Like, do they get dropped off? Like, how does that?
It's a lot of walking, biking in the metro. I think as the kids get older, they're doing it more on their own. High school is a bit more complicated. I think because there are magnet schools and schools for theater and schools for math. And so I think as the children get older, the travel becomes more complex. I think the youngest kids are really just being walked by their parents. Yeah. Although the cargo bike scene is growing too. Paris is becoming an incredible bike city. And so there's about 2 years in between these two. And what's great is you can collapse all this data together and then start to see how did this program really, just like the bike lane program, really take off during the pandemic. And you can kind of see here it's broken down by year, but then also by phase. So you can imagine that some of these light blue phase one in out years are being converted to phase two, right? And so this is part of kind of combining all these different types of data sets, what I'm collecting on the ground, what Google Street View is providing, satellite imagery. So the next part is the heat question. Paris, like a lot of cities, is dealing with a serious urban heat island effect. It can be kind of scorching, dangerously hot in the summer, especially because it is such a concrete and asphalt and stone heavy city. It has lovely parks, but gets very, very hot. And so what I wanted to do was think about the thermal environment of these school streets with adjacent streets, right? What I call control streets. One of the things helping with this is that buildings are almost all the same height by local regulation. And so what I would do is with a thermal sensor, I would compare the heat on this street momentarily with the heat in the middle of the kind of control street. I had a handheld thermal sensor, and you could kind of see it would take this kind of true color image, and then back at the computer, I could kind of analyze the thermal character of this. This cost about $200, this thermal camera. And so what was really interesting was to see that across the board, the streets that have had this cooling pavement significantly cooler than the control streets, averaged about 5 degrees C, 9 degrees Celsius. Right? I could feel it doing the field collection back and forth. It's a major difference, right, in terms of thermal comfort. And what was interesting is if you split this in half in terms of the control streets with the highest temperature, the average temperature difference was larger in the top half, meaning you're probably getting a larger temperature difference on these streets as the temperature goes up, right, on those like hottest summer days. This was just like, this was there have been studies of school streets before. This is the first thermal study of school streets. I have lots of other questions about this program. One of it is I'm really curious about the kind of commerce. So Paris, right, has tons of cafe seating and outdoor seating that overflows onto the street, and bars and these types of things. These businesses are taking full advantage of school streets. And so in some ways, I think the term school street is a bit of a misnomer because it's certainly influencing more than just parents and students and teachers. So I'm really curious you can steal these ideas. I'm curious in the revenue difference of, say, a cafe on a school street and a cafe across the street. I'm interested in that. Part of the problem, of course, is just you can be the city planner. What did I do? It looks like here. Just plug and unplug. Yeah. Sorry about that. I got too excited. Oh, here we go. You see. Choose to. Oh, I know. Okay, there we go. Choose content. power screen. Okay, sorry about that. Give me a chance to have a sip of water. And so one of the things, you can be the designer, the urban planner, you can build this beautiful space, but people figure out how these things work. So drivers figured out they weren't locked. You know, it says access for firefighters, but people would just, I watched this happen. People would get out of their car and open the gate and then drive in, right? And so with so many things, it's all about implementation. And so there's a kind of leakage, a policy leakage effect. Yeah.
Is the cooling just because of the reflected pavements and the foliage, or like are there other materials?
The cooling question is really difficult. And this is just like a very first kind of blush at that. So what I try to do as much as possible is control the variables here by only doing streets that were the same orientation, the same time of day, and I would only do it full shade on both streets or full sun on both streets. But of course, there's other variables, right? These buildings are not the exact same height. They're not the exact same orientation. Right? A lot of Parisian streets kind of bend. And you have other pieces like the cars can be these heat magnifiers, right? They can exacerbate urban heat conditions. And so I was looking at the pavement, but of course it's more complicated. I think thermal satellite imagery is going to be really important for the heat study. I think this was a start to say, like, there's certainly a cooling effect. The magnitude and how that varies. This was also only in the summer, right? So it's interesting. So the implementation piece is obviously a problem. The other thing is that some of these streets were not in great condition, right? They had this, some of the pavement had been like this kind of, I don't even know what to call it, these kind of markings or graffiti almost. Some of these streets were covered in trash. They were in lower income neighborhoods and they weren't cleaned. Some of the landscaping was like completely overgrown and not great. And so, of course, maintenance, upkeep, community hosting of these and kind of furnishing of these matters. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking back to what you were saying about how this is good for cafes and bars, even though it's marketed just as being safe streets to schools. Does that have something to do with why there's not as many benches? Is it a price? Or is it that money is literally being allocated to get the kids to school and then the bench doesn't fall under that? So
that's a great question. I think it's many different things happening at once. I think part of it is a system that is being built sequentially. So my guess is that if I did this even this upcoming summer, there'd be more seating. I think what I think is really strong about this program, and like for the future planners in the room, is that they didn't do this all at once and wait to cut the ribbon. It's like, we're going to start in some neighborhoods. Some are going to be phase one before some get to phase two, before some get to phase one, and we're just building as we go. Yeah, this is certainly in the tens of millions of dollars being spent, of euros being spent. And so I think part of it is they know they're onto something. There was a referendum recently in Paris to build 300 more of these. Not even just on school streets, it's just called like garden streets, and that was approved. So they're going to basically double the amount of these in the next 5 years. And I think there's lots of questions on what do these become. I was going to also say, as I kind of close out this part of the talk, is I think even calling them school streets doesn't really capture what's going on. You can kind of see here, like, this is when the school day is let out. You see parents with children. There's a lot of older adults who really love these spaces. You can imagine, maybe with mobility issues, they're not venturing very far from home. They might live far away from a park. So I'm super curious about how these are being embraced by people across the week and not just this kind of school piece. Yeah.
Cool. Before you finish on France, I guess.
Sure.
I was curious because I've seen this in Lyon where they've sort of taken the very clear super block model and dumped it there.
Yeah, more Spanish.
Yeah, more Spanish,
Okay.
more trying to calm traffic in the area and push drivers back onto main arterials. How is this dealing with the adjacent block where now you're doubling traffic, and are there noise impacts or things that affect those residents more because these have now become quiet for half the side that's not the school?
It's really great. I'll just put up the map for a second to answer that. What's interesting is most of these are alone. They're just a single block, and so they're not really in communication with others. It's basically like, we've removed this block from traffic. But what's interesting is some of the newer ones, like these ones here, they're actually built co-located. And so you're starting to get a little bit more of a super block kind of feel where one school street leads to another, which is also going to have more complicated traffic impacts. I would say thus far, given almost a quarter are still open to cars, I think that the traffic argument has not been the underlying argument. I think it's more, but Paris has such rich ground floor retail. I think that is the hardest. The merchants are the hardest group to kind of pacify. But to get from 300 to 600 is going to be really interesting. So I think this will be fruitful for a while to kind of push. And I think that currently this scale of School Street is far beyond any I've seen. And it's going to grow even more. Yeah.
I was thinking do you know if there's any more criteria for selecting the streets, especially when going beyond just schools into the garden streets area?
So they have only a few rules of which streets this can't happen for. It cannot happen on a street that has a bus route. It can't happen on a street that has a supermarket. And so that is how they've kind of limited it, although that opens up many, many streets. I would say now that they have the referendum passed for the 300 garden streets, it's good. The kind of selection criteria will be really interesting. Paris has a very strong mayor system. There's like mayors of each arrondissement, but they're kind of ceremonial. And at least in terms of transportation, I don't know about what it means for local schools. But it's a very strong mayor system. So a lot of it's going to depend on who's elected mayor this year. There's a socialist candidate who is the kind of protege of the current mayor. I think if she's elected, this is going to go full speed ahead. But some cities like Berlin recently had a political change where Berlin has gone back against a lot of these kind of programs. So I think both could be an option. And I'll just close to say, like, the School Street program is just one piece of a city, an old city that's rapidly changing. There's so many things happening in terms of what Parisian streets look like from a few years ago and now, in terms of bike lanes, in terms of pedestrianization, in terms of transit, in terms of housing, in terms of vegetation. So it's just a city in flux, which of course, for a social scientist, is great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Some of these things in theory, for example, like bike lanes in some places, have that idea that it's gentrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if that can, do you have any database to kind of explore that part?
So there's a research group right now I've joined. It's primarily like European researchers. That's the research question. And so I gave them this spatial database so they can kind of probe that. I would say thus far, these are pretty distributed across rich and poor Paris. And so it's going to be a very interesting test case for the gentrification question. I mean, Paris has a lot of issues with gentrification right now with housing supply, with the kind of treatment of minorities in these kind of ring suburbs. There's a lot of these issues that I think these will interrelate to. Yeah, so I think this is just kind of a starting point. For this paper, I really wanted to kind of draw a line in the sand of like, what is even this project we're talking about? Because I felt like a lot of the conversation was not capturing the complexity of it or the heterogeneity. And so I think this hopefully will seed many more of these projects. It's just out now in JPER. I just got the proofs, so I'm excited. Feel free to check out this paper. There's more in it that I described today. But that's the kind of happy pedestrianization side. Now let's go to the American context and let's talk about traffic.
Can I start with a question for the American side? I didn't hear you talking about tactical urbanism, for example.
Yeah.
Does it mean that Paris never needed the public to advocate for this and the administration just took it up on their own? So
the tactical urbanism question is so interesting because one of the things about these streets is they are not tactical urbanism. So or urban acupuncture. Those kind of terms often are quick build materials. They're very plastic in the sense that they can be installed and removed quickly. This is not this program. The phase 2 of this program is a long-term vision of this street, right? It's we're leveling it in terms of the grading. We're adding this. This is not something that can. I think by design they started off with just this kind of open the streets. We'll add some planters, and then we'll do the closing gates and nothing else. Once it's at phase 2, we've left the realm of tactical urbanism. And so I think it's actually interesting that's why it's so interesting to me to compare to something like low traffic neighborhoods in London, which really are these kind of movable planners that you could just pull up overnight. And so I think there's something about this in terms of urban design and planning to say, like, what does it look like to pedestrianize in a more long-term fashion? Not to say America couldn't rip it up.
Well, I have a following questions about planning and design. Or
So it's a good question. I certainly like was starting to see this kind of issue crop up, especially in like lower income neighborhoods. And so there's this kind of fact like, oh, are these going to not be maintained at the same rate? Because you can imagine the provision of services like garbage collection and landscaping are not uniform across Paris, unfortunately. So I think there is this challenge when you build this kind of program, like, do you build it for the long term in terms of all the supporting services? It's a really good question. I'm excited to get back this summer. We have this new 2-year grant from the French Embassy. So I'm working with a French researcher to kind of keep going. One of the questions we're going to pose is how this influences parents' behavior. That's one of the things we're going to kind of push. I'm going to shift to drive-throughs just for the sake of time. Hopefully it's past lunch. This talk is not going to make people hungry for a certain type of food. But I'm fascinated by drive-throughs, and I realize that my hypothesis is that they're very, very prevalent in the U.S. They've been very understudied by urban planners. There's very little. If you want to read research about drive-throughs, you're reading these like I was reading a lot of these reports for people who build and manage drive-throughs. Right? It's like in the kind of business school kind of journals around customers permitted and these types of things. But these obviously have dramatic implications for transportation safety, for sedentary lifestyles, for health and nutrition, for air quality. So I wanted to dig into this, and I'm going to talk through this in a totally different kind of set of methods than the Paris piece, which is really on the ground. I just want to point out, this is my great graduate student, Gowrie. He's a computer science master's student, and he has helped with every step of what I'm going to show today. Gowrie's a fantastic collaborator, and he'll be an author on this paper. So drive-throughs are this American invention, starting in the 1930 issue of Popular Mechanics. Autoists do banking from their cars. I never heard that term before, autoists. And so you can kind of see this lady with the flapper hat even, she's banking by her car. It almost looks like, I thought, oh, does she have like an iPhone in her hand, right? Like she's the size. I think it's like $1 bill or something. And of course, like as America became a car-centric nation, businesses and chains wanted to capitalize on that. And so more cars, more highways, more car-centric type of places to do all your shopping. Obviously, this is the most prominent in terms of fast food, but there's drive-through liquor stores, there are drive-through grocery stores, there's drive-through pharmacies, drive-through banks. As the country increasingly kind of suburbanized and sprawled, along with it went the drive-through. In the 1970s is when you had the first Wendy's drive-through, the first Del Taco drive-through. I think McDonald's was something like 1968. But even though these started in the 30s, they didn't really start to expand in terms of these kind of major chains we know until several decades later. A really big change, maybe people have noticed, strategy, as is Dunkin' Donuts. And so you have these chains in the Pacific Northwest, like Dutch Brothers Coffee, maybe some people know, but a big change in the kind of the nationwide landscape has been how much coffee and drink-based businesses now have drive-throughs. Drive-throughs are kind of hand in glove with a car-centric type of lifestyle, right? You could only have the provision of so many drive-throughs in a country that is so car-centric. So this is 52 cars lined up for an In-N-Out in Boise, Idaho. I don't think there's a lot going on in Boise, but this is remarkable, right? This was not that hard to find, okay, this satellite image. And just like before I dive into the kind of data crunching, this is really meaningful in terms of, I think, contributes to America's loneliness epidemic, right? This deters social engagement and activity. You're kind of atomized in your car. You're not running into someone when you're in the drive-thru, right? You're like explicitly walled off. I think this contributes to America's health issues around sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise. all of I mean, you're getting into the line here, right? You could park. There's parking spots for a lot of these cars. You could walk.
You actually can't park because you're blocked by
There-
the cars.
You cannot. You can't get in. I would love to talk to the person in this car. But this has lots of issues for air quality, right? All of these cars. If you are a pedestrian trying to enter into this business, there may not just be the queue swirling around here, but there's often the queue to get off the exit ramp. There's often the queue to get into these kind of shopping centers. So I think that this is a really critical thing to look at. Of course, one of the issues is how many of them are there in the United States? I like to start these research projects with these straightforward empirical questions, which will always, not always, but often take you in interesting directions. So I think for the students in the room hoping to start their own projects, think hard about that initial empirical question. So Gary and I started with, how many drive-thrus are there in the United States? Just ballpark, right? We're thinking about that. And of course, this is this kind of classic business school thing. If you can't measure something, you can't manage it, right? So if we're going to think at all about all of the effects that drive-thrus have, if we have no sense of accounting for how many of them there are and where they are, then we can't manage this in any way. And cities do manage drive-thrus. There's a number of cities that have zoning codes that limit and prohibit drive-thrus. And so if we want cities to be able to make decisions, informed decisions about those types of zoning kind of programs, they need data to work with. The speaker cuts out. Oh, that's I'm sorry, guy. I'm trying to stand near the microphone. So OpenStreetMap. Who here has used OpenStreetMap before? Okay, so a lot of people. That's great. OpenStreetMap is kind of like the Wikipedia of maps. It's a massive kind of volunteer-based project where users around the world have built this really fine-grained map of the world, where you can draw upon all this entire data set for lots of research purposes. What's useful for us in this context, might be a little hard to see here with the contrast, is if we look at how a drive-through, right? You can see this drive-through. This is in Portland, Oregon. There it is. It's Black Rock Coffee. You can see how it looks in OpenStreetMap. We have the building itself, and those buildings have a kind of tag for the people who have used OpenStreetMap. That tag will often say drive-through. And then there's also a service road, and you can also, if you're the user putting that into the map, you can tag that as drive-through. That's really, really useful programmatically if you want to extract that information from the map. So Jeff Boeing, he's a professor at USC, also Cal grad, really nice guy. He has built this kind of Python package called OSMNX, where you can, with really a small amount of Python, you can extract almost anything from OpenStreetMap based on how it's tagged and coded and nodes and ways and these types of things. So what we wanted to do in this context is we wanted to take advantage of the way this information is encoded into OpenStreetMap and extract that out. So one of the challenges, of course, is duplication, because you can have a drive-through where the building is tagged drive-through and the service road is tagged drive-through. So what we did was we were pulling out those separately, right? This is for Portland, Oregon, all the buildings that are tagged drive-through and all the service roads, and then we do a deduplication step of removing any that were within 30 meters of each other, right? So that actually gets us to this kind of merged results where we know we know fairly well we're not double counting, okay? We then wanted to see how accurate this would be if we're just using this approach to gather drive-throughs. Like, is this going to involve all these other, is this going to give us a set of results that has lots of establishments that aren't drive-throughs? So for Pittsburgh and Dallas and San Jose, our automated data set of these drive-throughs, we compared them manually to Google Maps to see if all those listings are drive-throughs. And we did pretty well, 94% of what was in our data set. So we generated 698 drive-throughs in those three cities. 657 are active live drive-throughs in Google Maps. So we feel pretty good about that accuracy. There's probably some, and again, this is a live project, there's probably some tinkering we can do to maybe get that number a little higher in the weeds of kind of like OpenStreetMap code. But we felt comfortable with that, just kind of start ramping it up. The other question, or here's just an example of like an error, what an error would be. So this is a street here, and you can see this way is tagged drive-through, and it's not a drive-through. It's just a street. So there are some errors. There's some what we call like a false positive, right, in this data set. 6%. So it's not nothing. The other question is completeness. So there's this question of if we're doing this approach, yeah, take the question.
I was wondering, does sometimes when you drive through overflow onto like major street, does that often get counted as part of the drive-through?
It tended not to in OpenStreetMap. We didn't see that error. Yeah. I think the more damning, not damning, but the more troubling issue is that a number of drive-throughs that exist are not tagged as drive-through. So this approach is missing some. So I'll give you an example. For Salt Lake City, we were able to just go to Starbucks website and we say like how many Starbucks are in Salt Lake City, and we did a filter for those that have drive-through. And we compared that to our list to say, okay, how many are we getting? Not just how many are incorrect, but are we gathering all of them? Is there a completeness kind of sense? So for Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy, Taco Bell, Del Taco, Arby's, and KFC, we pulled all those drive-thrus in Salt Lake. We got 86 of them in our data set. So the completeness is lower than the accuracy, but I'd always rather be in a position where we have more false negatives than false positives. So we can say this is a conservative estimate of drive-thrus.
Okay, and do you think that's because of like the lag time in people tagging things in OpenStreetMaps? Because these things are going to go in and out of business.
That's right.
Continually. There's a small part that's always going in and out of business.
There's a lot of churn in this kind of sector. This kind of business sector is absolutely right. I think there's two things happening. I think volunteers with OpenStreetMap are very regional. So the volunteer who's doing this in Salt Lake isn't the one doing it in Boise and those sorts of things. So some people are being really stringent and saying that's a drive-through, and some are leaving out that tag. And then part of it is so then what does that get us? So now, very, very quickly, right, this kind of programmatic approach, we can extract all of the drive-thrus, right, for the state of California, and we can categorize them by the category from OpenStreetMap as well, right? And so what's really interesting to us thus far, we're just starting to like sift through this information, is that there's this kind of historical imaginary of drive-thrus in the United States that are rural, they're on highway interchanges, the Great American Road Trip has to do with drive-thrus, right? But actually what we're seeing, and maybe people already kind of intuitively know this, drive-thrus are a predominantly urban and suburban phenomenon in the American landscape in terms of number. If you go to Los Angeles and San Diego, you can see like, no, these are throughout these kind of urban centers. They're no longer just something, on these kind of highway stretches. They're certainly in rural areas. We found plenty in some of these kind of rural areas, even east of the Sierras. But they're predominantly, they track with population. We've done this now for 10 states, and the footprint of drive-thrus tracks with the footprint of population, which has all these kind of implications for pedestrian safety, right? Meaning these are intersecting with local roads. Just another example, this was Orlando, and what we're already starting to see is we just have these corridors of drive-thrus. There's almost nowhere you can kind of drive along any kind of arterial without reaching a number of these. Perhaps we came in with a bit of a naivety about this, but I think the extent and the number, in California alone, there's 11,000 drive-thrus. The extent and number of these kind of businesses is far beyond, I think, what planners are kind of calculating just kind of based on impressions. This is Phoenix, right? It's like the Phoenix grid is a drive-through grid. And so I think that what we're going to hope to do in this paper is demonstrate how urban a phenomenon this kind of land use is in a way that reinforces car-centricity and all of its kind of negative externalities. You can think of the drive-through, I think, as the kind of logical conclusion of a car-centric landscape. Right? You never even have to leave your car for all this kind of commerce. And certainly we can start to actually quantify that. we're doing other things with this data set. Certainly, we're using it to kind of get a sense of like quantitatively how much of this is rural. These are census-based definitions of these terms. We did not come up with this. So less than 500 people, between 500 and 3,000 is suburban, and more than 3,000 is categorized as urban. And so I just ran this just today, actually, because this is all just fresh. And so if we look at drive-throughs by population density for California, the bulk are in these areas considered urban, right? I thought actually suburban, my hypothesis with suburban would be the highest. But based on this kind of categorization, right, this is flowing with populations. Yeah.
I'm curious to see for some of the older cities in the US, like thinking about Northeast cities, for example, if you are seeing this phenomenon less of it. Example, like, growing up in the Northeast versus coming to California, I feel like the cities here are very, very differently planned because they're largely post-car.
It's a really good question. We've run this for some of the first 10 states, including Connecticut, Delaware. I'm from the East Coast too, so I had this hypothesis too. Maybe this would be heavier in more Western states.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily look that way.
Very interesting.
Yeah. We found that Colorado maybe has the most per capita of the first 10 states we've done, which is not necessarily what we expected. Is there a question on Zoom?
Yeah.
Someone raised that.
Let's see if I can see.
I'm not sure how we're set up.
Oh, okay. That's okay. So this is you can kind of see what we're starting with. Rural is actually a real minority of these. Suburban is much higher than that, and then urban, swallows both of those. So I tend to think that that order will hold nationally, perhaps not proportional. But we're gonna have that information soon because this code runs pretty quickly. We can run, for those interested in the Python piece, I think we run each state in about an hour. Alaska is a lot of land, so Alaska took 5 hours. Very few drive-throughs. The other thing we're gonna try to do, this is also relying on OpenStreetMap, is we want to connect every single drive-through we find to the road category it intersects with. And so OpenStreetMap has about 6 categories of road. We've collapsed those into 3. We're going to call highway, arterial, and then local streets. These are the kind of 2 drive-throughs that I think permeate the imagination of drive-throughs. And I think what's going to be interesting is how much of it is actually this, where you just have single-family homes and this drive-through in the middle. This is in Philadelphia. So this one on the right? So this kind of this East Coast type piece. For those, on the public health side of things, this is where the public health implications become a lot more serious, right? The idling kind of vehicles, the pedestrian safety type of issues. Certainly, a stroad like this is already dangerous for pedestrians. Add in a drive-through, and I imagine that will exacerbate it. So again, it's a similar type of thing of to the school street piece, is that until we have this kind of data set we feel really good about, that only then does it set the table for all these kind of secondary analyses. One of the things I also say is when you're doing this kind of automated work, spend a lot of time in a kind of qualitative way with the imagery, with the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question. I was wondering if you knew why that was, because as you've been talking,
why
they're so focused on cities now, because I grew up in what you would call maybe a small town, not exactly rural. But in the last 20 years, they've lost a lot of their drive-throughs, which might sound weird. They started out with drive-throughs and they've been disappearing, not just food ones, but also bank drive-throughs, even though the town has grown in population.
It's very
And I'm like, is that just a weird anecdote, or is there's some pattern to why they're more popular in big cities? Is it just density?
I think in part it's density. One of the things I found in these kind of business reports is the price. So I'll show here, the price of land adjacent to large mall parking lots. Large malls are selling the fringes of their parking lots to drive-throughs. That is the real estate drive-throughs want. They want you to go to Best Buy, and on your way in, on your way out, you go to Shake Shack. That is that kind of sweet spot for them. And so one of the things we're finding just qualitatively is you could probably see in the maps, but if you zoom in, drive-throughs are really clustering, right? There tends to be this type of leader effect where one drive-through conveys to other franchises that the conditions are ideal. And so you have, this is an apartment building, there's a pool here, right? They've got 5 drive-throughs right outside, right? You know, you could walk ostensibly. I bet people drive from here. My dad lived in Riverside and would drive across the street to his dry cleaning place and give me an aneurysm. But what we found here, count them, there's 9 drive-throughs, right? And so what we're realizing is the kind of corridor and cluster effect of these. For those interested, Chick-fil-A, Whataburger, Taco Bell, Williams Chicken, Williams Chicken, Church's Chicken, A&W, I didn't know that still existed, McDonald's, El Pollo Loco, and KFC. This is in Dallas. Yeah.
How many of them work together? Because I know that some of these companies kind of have partnerships and they
Such a
tend
good
to
point.
put one next to the other.
So a lot of these businesses are franchises. A lot of them have partnerships. There's the kind of KFC. What is KFC? What did they go with?
KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell.
Yeah, there we go. Right. And so what happens is you get entrepreneurs who might actually own franchises in multiple chains, and then they're filing the permits all at the same time, right? And so I think one of the things we're finding is you're quickly getting this like comically inefficient use of land for these drive-through kind of clusters. And we're going to try to quantify that. Like there's different, hotspot analysis we can kind of do. These are the most I found thus far qualitatively, this kind of group of 9. This one is like, there were a few of these this is not a drive-through, but it used to be. So it could have been lucky number 10. But I just think that this work is really important in terms of where businesses are going. This is called Taco Bell Elevate. It's their new product. This has 4 drive-through lanes. I wish I were making this up. This is not an AI generated image. This is real. This is what this looks like. This is in Minnesota. This is in suburban Minneapolis. And you can kind of see it's like this kind of, this is 2 levels. And so the tacos, they call tacos, come down an elevator shaft. And so I think that I think as planners and designers and urbanists and engineers, I think we have to grapple with this in terms of what all the implications this has for our built landscape, for health, for active lifestyles, safe transportation. And I think that the businesses are going in one direction and the planning and the design has to be a kind of counterbalance. And I hope that this research project starts that conversation by at least seeding the conversation with data, right? We can start to think about this more quantitatively. And I just want to say this is not an American issue, right? I spent part of January in Mexico City for research, a totally different project, and I could not escape the drive-thru, Auto Express, right? And so this is one of those American exports that we wish weren't. And so it's so fun to share these 2 projects with you. The Paris paper should be out any day now, and the drive-through one hopefully later this year. Yeah, and I'm happy to see. I know we've got plenty of time for questions. Yeah.
I was wondering, how much of stuff like the Taco Bell Elevate do you think is related to DoorDash and
It's a really good question. Yeah. So one of the things that Taco Bell Elevate is doing is one of these lanes will just be for app delivery drivers. And so I think the pandemic did 2 things in the context of drive-thrus. The pandemic made people wary to eat inside, and then so there was this kind of gold rush for drive-thrus during the pandemic. The rise of app delivery is also supercharging this kind of drive-thru piece. And so you're starting to see more and more establishments that want to create separate facilities even. Del Taco now has a restaurant category called off-premises. You cannot eat inside. It is drive-through only. And so it's so Orwellian. This is an off-premises restaurant. And so I think that the conversation, at least I've seen in the kind of on our side of things, in the planning, design, engineering kind of side, has not kept pace with the business publications, which are going all in on these types of establishments. Yeah.
I just want to say, like, I feel like one thing about drive-through is that it reduces physical activity. It's the exclusion of people who are outside the car. So I went to LA over the winter break, and then I went to like a drive-through in downtown LA.
How dare you?
And then at like 2 a.m. at midnight, and then like there were like a bunch of cars still lining up, and then like we were just already parked our car. We didn't want to drive it to the drive-through again, so we just walked up and asked, can we just order like walk-through instead? And then the guy just ignored us. And
That's right. Most states it's illegal. Most states it's illegal to service the drive-through or patronize the drive-through without a car. In Oregon, you can walk or bike up to the window. But yeah, no, I mean there's this type of thing of if you're at one of these off-premises restaurants, it's if you don't have a car, it's not for you, right? And there's all kinds of socioeconomic implications.
Because they are locking the lobby like after a certain time you're entering. So
that's right.
Kind of basically denies like entry or like any business with like pedestrians or people outside the car for certain hours of the day.
This is a nuance where there's often a restaurant that will have in-person hours and drive-through hours that extend beyond that. And restaurants will say, well, this is for staff safety, right? There's all these stuff.
About the malls that, you see this suburban town center style development, these artificial social spaces that are created by like a development company. But now I was thinking that would be a way to aggregate people out of their cars and get them into restaurants. But you're saying now they're selling the peripheral land to bring in people. So like, where is like the policy and planning solution here? Like, is it, we just need to limit drive-throughs? I can imagine the blowback from these companies would be pretty grand because it seems to be a cost base. So it's like, if we're tackling with it, do we just have to accept it? Or do you see any examples of where like cities are using zoning strategically to make a better outcome?
I think there's ways to play what I would say play offense and play defense.
Sure.
So I think like on the defense side, starting in the 1980s, towns just started using the zoning code to just limit drive-through restaurants explicitly. There's, you cannot have like Newton, Massachusetts, this kind of well-heeled suburb of Boston. So you just can't have drive-through restaurants. The arguments have largely been upheld by courts for these kind of bans, and they're often on the basis of air pollution and of nutrition. So like these restaurants are really unhealthy, and drive-throughs are part and parcel of this unhealthy lifestyle. We don't want to encourage that in our town. Some towns have limits on how close a drive-through can be to a school. So they've really taken this emphasis on children's safety and children's health. So it's almost like treating it like a liquor store, right? Something more unsavory. And so part of it is that. I think the offense to play on offense is to build a kind of playing environment that really encourages mixed use, walkable types of denser places, such that a drive-through is not amenable to that type of environment. I mean, so I live in San Francisco, and it is surprising. There's a drive-through McDonald's a few blocks from my house, and what's otherwise a very dense, walkable kind of neighborhood. So it doesn't mean businesses won't approach.
And just one follow-up on that, like I guess as values go up in that area, like in San Francisco, that's probably a legacy McDonald's. And so they're sitting on a really expensive parcel of land and half of it's going unused to parking space. And so I would imagine there's also an economic factor that at some point will tip over and they'll say we'd rather sell
to a condo developer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's a whole other issue, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I think drive-throughs are evidence of and contributor to car-centric type of environments. And I think measuring them tells us a lot about like the image of Phoenix is basically just the map of Phoenix. And I think in San Francisco there's like 7 drive-thrus. And so I think it's a metric as well of like you could almost see it as like an index, like how car-centric is your town? How many drive-thrus does it have, right, per capita? Yeah.
Just looking at your maps, your legend is pretty comprehensive as far as the type of drive-thrus. But you also have an other.
Yeah, it's a great catch. We're also, I think this is also new. I think we're going to collapse some of these categories. Like I think we might collapse restaurant and fast food. I think those are probably the same in terms of what we care about. I would say cafe is probably different because we looked closely. Cafe tends to mean like coffee shop. Other means that the person who tagged it in OpenStreetMap didn't provide a category. So this is again, I mean, there's pitfalls of working with OpenStreetMap, and one is the fidelity of the data itself. For people interested in like APIs, we've been trying to use Google Maps API, Yelp's API, Foursquare API to do this. It's very, very difficult actually to get the filtering right. I'm not sure, let me just see if I just, for the people interested in the kind of longitudinal question, let's see if I have this picture. A lot of libraries have drive-throughs now too. Oh, I don't have it, but we're starting to use satellite imagery to track the longitudinal expansion of drive-throughs because I'm curious about how much these have grown since 2020. And you can use satellite imagery to kind of see the establishment date. It's also something I would have loved to pull from Yelp's API. They will not let you do that. So I'll stick around. Really great to share this all with you, and best of luck with the rest of the quarter. Thank you so much.